Okay, folks, so today is another Turbo Educational video. As much as I know some of you don't like it, in fact, one person said that my channel's going downhill. To that I say, one of my first videos was live streaming a furnace. How much more downhill can we go? Anyway, what we're going to learn about today is delta circuits and why, in theory, you can't get a shock from them, and yet somehow you still do. Alrighty. So, for those of you who aren't in the know, if you want to look around for a delta circuit, and big transmission power lines, most of them anyway, are a type of delta. And we're going to we're going to pretty much entirely focus on an ungrounded delta. So, give you the lay of the land here. Each of these represents a transformer coil. Alrighty. Okay, and then these would be the lines here that you would see. This is called phase. It's called line. These are not, as I mentioned in the last video, these are not called phases. Okay, stop calling them phases. These are phases. Alrighty, now that that's out of the way. So normally on a power circuit, again, that Y one I drew a couple videos ago, we have it sort of connected to a ground in the middle. That's what that neutral's for. You don't remember why each of these is a phase. The middle is the neutral. We take the neutral and we connect it to Earth. So Earth is our 0-volt reference. Now, an important thing you gotta understand about electricity is that contrary to what you may believe, it is not going to the ground. I don't know who thought of that genius idea, but it's simply false. It's trying to get back to the source, which is one of the phases that it originated from. So I get shocked from a Y1 power line because I'm here touching the earth. I touch, here for some reason, or a tree does, and so it'll travel along the tree down into the earth, and then usually up the ground wire that's running down the pole, back on the neutral, and then back to its respective phase. So in theory, there is, well, in actuality too, there is a significant amount of voltage between any phase and Earth. And that would be our phase voltage, not line voltage. Anyway, and you can get a line voltage if you're really unlucky. You decide you want to touch two of the lines at once. But anyway, in theory, we don't do this much because lightning needs a way to get to the earth. I know it sounds contradictory, but believe me, lightning's trying to get to the earth. It's like a capacitor discharging. So, in theory, since we do not connect this delta to the ground, if I were to touch just one of these lines, or if a tree were to fall on it or something, where is it going to go? There's no path back to any of these lines and phases or whatever. There's no, unless I were to touch two of them, or if two of these lines, or three of them even, but just two, were to fault at once, there would be a path back to the phase now. But since I'm not connecting it to the ground, in theory, you can imagine, if I were to take a voltmeter between here and here, and I have this drawn out The phase and line voltage are the same since it's a delta circuit, but 345,000 volts. And yet somehow if I take a voltmeter and put it between one of the phases and Earth, or one of the lines in Earth, somehow I'll get 0 volts. And since Ohm's law, voltage equals current times resistance, if there's no voltage, the current's 0, or I cannot get a shock. But yet somehow you're still not supposed to touch those transmission lines. In fact, they're probably worse to touch than those Y-wound distribution lines you see running on the poles. So why then is it dangerous to touch a transmission line that's an ungrounded delta, and in theory has 0 voltage between line and ground? Well, thanks to the magic, a phenomenon known as capacitive coupling. Alrighty? So what's a capacitor? It's like 2 conductive plates separated by a dielectric, which is an insulator that can kind of store charge. The atoms in it are able to stretch, so the nucleus will stretch towards the positive side of the capacitor, and the electrons will stretch towards the negative side. And not all insulators can do this, so that's why we call it dielectric. Air is a dielectric. There's certain pastes, oil maybe even. So anyway, you got the 2 conductive plates here, separated by dielectric. Right? So if I take 2 foil plates and put paper between them and I roll them together, and I connect one plate to one side of the circuit, another plate to the other side, I've made a capacitor. And so the principle of operation here is that I'm trying to get from one side of the capacitor to the other. Alrighty? Trying not, because there's a voltage that develops across this. We're trying to equalize it. It's sort of the law of the universe, equalize energy. So anyway, what happens when I have a 300-mile long line running across an equal amount of earth separated by air, which is a dielectric? I get a capacitor. Alrighty, so if you can imagine, line is one end of the capacitor, and that's the symbol for a capacitor, by the way. But anyway, one end's connected to a line. You have the earth down here, with the dielectric being air. So these air-insulated lines separated by air from the earth. What do you think happens there? Especially after like hundreds of miles that these lines run. Well, you get a voltage. Perhaps not as high as the line voltage, but it's there. And for that reason, if I were to touch one of these transmission line phases, we kind of have a little bit of an issue, because now there's voltage. Imagine hand to foot, it's about 1,000 ohms of resistance. We have voltage, current. And current's what's going to kill you. Alright. So the next little quirk here Maybe I shouldn't have erased that triangle. Delta. We'll draw a less fancy one. I don't want to take up too much of your time. Click at a video at any moment. Okay. So again, we got our delta circuit, a little less fancy. So then, if we have one of the phases fault out, how then can a breaker trip? Because I mean, even though it doesn't really matter, it can be a problem for various reasons. You don't want, if another one were to fault out, you might have a big flash or something like that. Well, it's simple. We have a zigzag transformer at the substation or something like that, connected to a ground fault relay. And when this ground fault relay detects there's voltage from line to ground, phase voltage here, and it'll create it since it's a grounding transformer. You'll say, okay, goes the grounding relay, time to trip out this circuit, tell system control. Now that was a little side note there, has nothing, very little to, a moderate amount to do with the video, but nonetheless, now you know. From all of us, me, Turbo Educational, yeah,